It all starts deep in the Amazon in Ecuador, where you can feel the apparent peace and tranquility of the jungle. That breaks his silence in 1943, when the Waodani tribe suffers a ferocious and infernal attack, where half of them lose their lives pierced by spears from another Waodani due to a cycle of violent revenge that is bringing them to the brink of extinction. That night they mercilessly attack adults, children and even babies in a savage way. They go with the sole objective of annihilating them. But they do not succeed as the Dayumi children, Gimaid and Minkayani, flee into the depths of the jungle and survive the atrocious event. The next day the children meet again with the relatives who survived the attack, but in view of the desire for revenge, Dayumi's father asks Minkayani to take his daughter away, since she is in serious danger if she stays in the tribe. Upon arriving where a group of outsiders was, which is the name the Waodani give to the explorers, they rescue Dayumi. In 1955, 12 years later, Nate, one of the missionaries who helped rescue Dayumi, still lives on the edge of the Amazon jungle with his little son Steve, who, despite his young age, follows in his father's footsteps.
He would make flights as often as he could.
They are joined by 4 American evangelical missionaries who arrive in the Amazon jungle staying near Nate, with the intention of evangelizing uncontacted peoples. His goal is to get closer to the Waodani and save them from the persecutions that have been going on for generations. To do this, Nate flies in his plane over areas of the jungle looking for signs of indigenous life. When he suddenly visualizes a Waodani tribe, immediately his first encounter with the group is reported by radio to his son Steve. Nate's family bond made his own children part of his missionary work.
I'm going around.
Days later, Nate in his camp, where he lives with his wife Marjorie and his children, he meets with his team. At that meeting, Nate informs them of his contact with a Waodani tribe, and they organize to schedule how to make a first contact with the indigenous people. Meanwhile, violence reappears between the tribes in the area, when a group of Waodani men attack a family from the Yanomami tribe with spears to take their women and seize them. When the day arrives to make the first contact with the indigenous people, the missionaries fly over the area of the Waodani and manage to deliver some gifts. Thus they create a friendship between them. For several days the missionaries fly over the area again using the same strategy, until they receive a bird from the natives as a thank you. Thinking that the natives were already friends of the missionaries, they decide to camp near the tribes. For which Nate says goodbye to his son, who is very afraid that the Waodani could harm his father and that he can never see him again, and with tears in his eyes, Steve teaches him some words that his aunt has learned from Dayumi, the member of the tribe that was rescued by the explorers in 1943, so that she pronounces them in case of being in danger. What does it mean? I am your friend, your sincere friend.
I am your friend.
The missionaries observe the ideal place to land in the jungle. This is located next to a river and very close to the indigenous village, where they manage to land very easily. At that moment, the Waodani, hidden in the bushes, observe how the missionaries await them with music, toys, and gifts. When 2 women approach, one of them is Gimaid, and a man from the tribe named Nenkawi, they ask about Dayumi. They, not understanding what the natives asked, could not give an answer about it, so the indigenous people return to the jungle assuming that Dayumi is no longer alive due to the inability to receive an answer from the missionaries. Back at the tribe, the indigenous people told a group of hunters from the tribe, led by Minkayani, who had become a violent and seasoned hunter, that the missionaries had taken his life and eaten Dayumi. At that moment, Minkayani and the hunters mistakenly believe that the missionaries came to exterminate them and that they were cannibalistic beings. For this reason they seek a way to protect their tribes, and taking their spears and machetes, they go to meet them. In the attack the missionaries do not defend themselves because they are firmly convinced not to harm them, but unfortunately none of the missionaries is left alive. They don't even forgive Nady, who, on the verge of losing her life, says those words in her language that her son taught her. Days after the abominable event, the families of the missionaries, after failing to communicate with them, send a group of the army to go to the area where the missionaries were exploring. After a long search, they arrive at the place of the tragedy. A terrifying silence surrounds a sad scene near the bodies of the missionaries float on the banks of the river with spear wounds running through their bodies. When the members of the army return, they give the terrible news to the families of the missionaries, while Steve listens in secret to the heartbreaking news.
Roger.
Steve, with his heart broken and full of rage, vows never to be friends with anyone again. And when his aunt arrives, she immediately tells him, very sad, that those words were useless. Moments later, the wives of the victims, with a mixture of feelings of helplessness and admiration, look at everything that the missionaries had documented through a video rescued by the army during their trip to the jungle. Naomi, who was present at the scene while filming the video, recognized her indigenous family, discovering that it was her relatives who carried out the tragedy. When she sees all that, she goes into crisis and plunges into a deep sadness that led her to make a drastic change in her life, and she offered all her efforts to mediate with the Waodani. Naomi wants to show her tribal family that not all outsiders are bad. On the other hand, a new and long search begins for Naomi's family to find her. The day she least expected, Naomi was presented with the opportunity she had been waiting for so much, after her family dared to approach the missionaries, as they had done 12 years ago. She leaves her sister Gimaid and her mother to live in the missionary settlements. However, the atmosphere of hatred and violence towards the natives after the extermination still persisted among the families of the missionaries and explorers, so some did not want the Naomi family or the family of those in the camp. Faced with all this situation, and having the community of missionaries and explorers against them, Naomi, Gimaid, Akawo and the other wives of the deceased missionaries go into the jungle to live together and evangelize the Waodani, who believed they had done wrong and take the lives of the missionaries. Naomi, upon being received by the tribe, she meets Minkayani, who felt hatred and resentment towards the missionaries for fear of being dominated. Naomi, in her attempt to appease her community, explains that the missionaries came in peace, while Minkayani, still incredulous, reminds Naomi of all the attacks and invasion attempts they have suffered from other tribes and strange people years before. Despite the fact that Minkayani remains reluctant to live with the missionaries, the other natives accept his entry into the tribe under certain conditions. One night, several weeks after beginning his coexistence with the missionaries, Minkayani is visited by a member of his tribe, who reproaches him for the fatal mistake they made by taking away the right to live from the 5 husbands with whom they now lived, that it produced divisions and arguments within the tribe. Despite everything, the missionaries continue to help the Waodani. They are vaccinated against diseases, help build new huts and houses. And even their youngest children integrate into the community, attracting more people to live with them. At that moment, Nate's son Steve, one of the missionaries killed, unknowingly meets Minkayani, who killed his father. One morning, while the hunters of the Waodani tribe are on their hunting day, they find the lifeless body of Minji, a member of the tribe, pierced by the spears of the Aeronautics. Minkayani, who commanded the hunting group, returns to the village to report what has happened and calls to prepare for a war against the adversaries. But Kimo, a Waodani, refuses to fight, following the missionaries' teachings. When night falls, women and children stay in the Waodani village, waiting for the rivals to attack. And in the midst of an abysmal silence, they listen to the enemies approaching. Fear dominated all the senses of the women in the village, but Naomi chose to speak with the rival tribe. And it is where they find out that the Aeronautics blamed the Waodani for having spread the fever, but in the tribe of the Waodani all were healthy thanks to the vaccinations. Naomi, thanks to his teachings, offers them help. Enominani women approach the village with their sick children. Marjorie and the missionaries, without thinking twice, offer attention and care to sick children. The village is quarantined because the fever the Enominanis were suffering from was polio.
We have an emergency. Over. Return with the Enominani. All of them.
While the Waodani care for the Enominani children, they receive food and medical supplies from ground and air missionaries. While all this is happening, Minkayani, along with other hunters, is attacked by an anaconda in the river, where a girl from his tribe loses her life. The indigenous man, full of sadness and despair, begins to doubt everything that the missionaries have taught him and wants to take up arms again to have power and that none of this will happen again. 2 months later, with the quarantine and endless cycle of revenge over, little Steve, his mother, and all the missionaries return to his home in the United States. But before leaving, Steve says goodbye to his friend Minkayani, the way his father would have liked him to have done. Rachel, his aunt who also worked as a missionary, decides to stay with the Waodani tribe. In 1993, Rachel passes away from cancer, and Steve, already a man with a wife and children, returns to the community to say goodbye to his aunt. Minkayani suggests that Steve stay in the jungle to live with them, but Steve tells him that he was not yet ready to change his life and move from the United States to the Amazon. The next day, Minkayani asks Steve to come with him to a place near the area. They sail down the river and arrive at the beach where Nate's life had been taken. Minkayani confesses that he was the one who had pierced his father's body with his spear. Steve, full of anger, confronts Minkayani, and Minkayani, full of guilt and regret, asks Steve to kill him. However, Steve is convinced that his father was not annihilated, but that he gave his life doing what he liked. Finally, Minkayani is forgiven by Steve, and little by little they establish a friendship, beyond what has happened in the past. This is the summary of a Christian film based on real events called The End of the Spirit. Click here and do not miss the following story.